Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Andrew Kirikoff, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, we're talking about my must-draft running backs going into the 2019 fantasy football season. So today, I'm going to be talking about 3 different running backs, a couple thoughts on the matter, my opinions, and why I think you guys should target them in your upcoming 2019 fantasy football draft. So without further ado, as we usually do, I'm going to remind you guys, for those of you who haven't subscribed to the channel, I'm about 10 subs away from that big 5,000 mark. So any help in that direction would be fantastic. Join the community. Hit me up down in the comment section if you have any questions, comments, concerns. Also, for those of you who haven't already, click that bell button. The bell notification button lets you know anytime I put out any content, whether that's a live stream, whether that's a video that I've just uploaded. Often I come home from work, have to record my videos, and by the time I upload it, it's at 10 o'clock and it kind of gets hidden. So that notification bell goes a long way. So hit that up, and thank you very much. All right. Hey, everybody. How's it going? All right. So before we begin, I just want to talk about these 3 running backs. If, in fact, you don't think these running backs are great, fantastic. I've heard a lot of noise on these 3 specific running backs this offseason. Specifically, a lot of people think, okay, these guys are undervalued at sometimes. Perhaps some of you may be thinking these guys should be drafted earlier. If I could convince you at least on one of these 3 running backs to kind of at least consider them going into the 2019 season, I'd consider that a success as of right now. I think all 3 of these guys have pretty good potential. What they all 3 have in common, they're all 3 very young running backs. They've all dealt with injuries in their past. They all play in the same division. They all play in the NFC North, and they all have to play the Bears twice a season. So either way, that's kind of my little spoiler warning, but let's go ahead and let's talk about these running backs, shall we? All right, so my first running back, as per the thumbnail, it's Kerryon Johnson, right? So let's talk about Kerryon Johnson, what he's capable of doing, and why I think he should be a must-draft or at least targeted running back in the eyes of fantasy owners and for you guys. So what are the Lions capable of, right? In 2017, the Lions backfield produced were last in the NFL in rushing attempts and rushing yards. So we know that the Detroit Lions are not a good rushing team. They haven't been in years, to be honest. The last time they were actually outside of the bottom 5 in team rushing stats was in 2013 when Reggie Bush was the starting running back of the Lions organization. So it's been quite some time since the Detroit Lions has actually had a decent running back. In the last couple of years, they've kind of just used Theo Riddick in the passing game, and they've just rotated Amir Abdullahs and Zach Zenners, and it's just been a mess in that backfield. But going into 2018, Matt Patricia, the new head coach of the Detroit Lions, he came in and he kind of wanted to change the system. He wanted to kind of change the culture of the Lions offense and the team as a whole. So he decided to kind of create this Patriot-esque offense in which they have 4 running backs, similar to the Patriots, because Matt Patricia used to be the defensive coordinator of the New England Patriots. He came in and he kind of wanted 4 solid running backs. And if we talk about the Patriots, they have their Sony Michel, Rex Burkhead, James White, and then now Damian Harris from Alabama, right? Similar to what the Lions had last season, which is LeGarrette Blount, Kerryon Johnson, who was their 2nd-round pick, Zach Zenner, and Theo Riddick, a little bit of Amir Abdullah until he was cut. So this Patriots-esque offense kind of revolves around having a lot of depth at the running back and kind of using a rotation of sorts, but still having their main RB1 get majority of the carries. Now, let's talk about what Kerryon Johnson did last season that kind of gives me some excitement and or hope going into 2019. So in his 10 games played, because he had a knee injury that put him on the IR in the back half of the season, in his 10 games played, he had 118 rushing attempts, 641 rushing yards, 5.43 yards per rushing attempt, pretty good average, 3 rushing touchdowns, 39 targets that went to 32 receptions, just about 85+% catch rate there for 213 receiving yards, and 1 receiving touchdown on average in those 10 games, 12.34 fantasy points per game in half-point PPR scoring format. So in that kind of 11-week gap, I know 10 games, but it was an 11-week gap because of the bye week, Kerryon Johnson was the number 16 running back in half-point PPR fantasy football. So to be honest, a running back in the Lions offense, which has not been good in seasons prior, in fact, they've been last for quite some time, was able to not only fight through the competition of the backfield with LeGarrette Blount and Theo Riddick in the passing game, he was able to become a RB2 through his first 10 games of the season. And to be honest, in the beginning of the season, the first 2 games, he wasn't given many rushing attempts. He had, I think, 13 rushing attempts in the first 2 weeks, and really no yardage to follow. So it was really an 8-game stretch in which Kerryon Johnson solidified himself as the RB1, made it apparent to everyone that he is not only just a great running back, but a fantastic fantasy running back that we can rely upon. Like I mentioned, he had to battle through the competition of the backfield. He lost 89 total rushing attempts in those 10 weeks, a lot to LeGarrette Blount, who I think LeGarrette Blount accompanied just about 80 or so rushing attempts. So about 7 or 8 rushing attempts a week went to LeGarrette Blount. And then on top of that, Kerryon Johnson only played 51.5% of offensive snaps and still was the number 16 running back in fantasy in that 11-week stretch, 10 games. Now, to kind of put it into more perspective, when Kerryon Johnson fully became the established RB1 of the Detroit Lions, it was more apparent because they continued to give him more rushing attempts, right? They kind of scaled back the attempts of a LeGarrette Blount. They made sure Zach Zenner never saw the field. And sure, Theo Riddick saw the field here and there in the passing work, often either as a third down receiving back or perhaps in other areas of the formation. But when Kerryon Johnson was given 14-plus rushing attempts in a single game, right, and that happened 4 times last season, he averaged 17.87 fantasy points per outing when he was given 14-plus rushing attempts per game. I mean, that is pretty efficient. Now, in games in which he wasn't given those 14-plus attempts, only averaged 8.65 fantasy points per game, half-point PPR scoring formats. Now, the difference, pretty big deal. Now, the question that kind of remains is whether or not Kerryon Johnson's going to get those 14-plus or kind of in that area range of rushing attempts. Now, many of you may be thinking, C.J. Anderson's coming into the offense, and I personally was of the opinion a couple weeks back, perhaps a month ago, in which thinking that the presence of a C.J. Anderson could potentially hurt Kerryon Johnson. Now, that being said, we saw LeGarrette Blount dig into his attempts and really not hurt him too much. I expect C.J. Anderson to come in and kind of fill in for that role. LeGarrette Blount's a little bit older running back. C.J. Anderson looked good last season for the Rams. There was a 3-game stretch in which he had 4 touchdowns and 500 rushing yards. Great. Congratulations to him. He's going to come in. He's going to be that RB2 on this team. He's going to kind of fill in for 7 or 8 snaps per game, or at least rushing attempts per game. Outside of that, Theo Riddick, where does he stand? As of right now, looking into it, Theo Riddick is kind of trending towards the roster bubble, meaning he might not even make the Lions roster, the 53-man roster. There's an actual good chance that Theo Riddick is out this season. He might be cut, might be traded. And if that's possible, all of those passing attempts are going to go towards Kerryon Johnson. Kerryon Johnson had a pretty good stint of games where he was pretty relevant in the passing game. He had a game in which he was 8 for 8 catching, 8 targets, 8 receptions, and he was pretty good in the passing game. His catching rate was over 85% last season. So he can be dependable in that kind of a scheme in which he's given the ball through the passing game and then gets 13-plus, 14-plus rushing attempts per game. And I think that's where he's going to land this coming season. I think now that the Detroit Lions are kind of shifting their offense towards a more balanced kind of scheme, I understand last year they still only ran the ball 40% of the time, but this offense is going to shift a little bit. It's going to go towards the idea of where we have a solidified offensive line. They went and drafted a couple more guys. They've brought in a couple offensive linemen in the last couple drafts as well, to where they can solidify themselves as a running team so that Kerryon Johnson can at least take a little bit of the pressure off of Matthew Stafford, who struggled last season, to be honest. In the second half of the season, Matthew Stafford was pretty much not even there. Now, currently, where's Kerryon Johnson going in drafts? He's kind of going in the 4th round. He's being ranked around RB 19-ish, 20, which in my opinion is extremely undervalued. I think as of right now, at that kind of an ADP, he's a guy that I would love to have on my rosters as an RB2, especially perhaps even if you go early wide receivers. This guy could for sure be an RB2, RB1 on your team, depending on how you kind of adjust your team. But I don't think he's going to be taking that huge step forward into being an RB1, a top 12 running back, but there's always a possibility. The future is unpredictable at points. So there's always a chance. And I think the way that Kerryon Johnson's trending, I think it's past RB20 or RB19 in 2019. Kind of putting it in perspective, last season, in the 16 games, okay, I kind of broke it down. The best running back of the Lions on a per week basis. So like, let's say first week, the best running back was Theo Riddick. And in the second week, it was LeGarrette Blount. And the third week, it was Kerryon Johnson, right? I totaled the best running back on every single week. And the total of the 16 games was 211 fantasy points for Lions running back. So if Kerryon Johnson can stay healthy, if he can get the passing work, right? I don't care if CJ Anderson is taking away 10 carries. I expect Kerryon Johnson to be a good running back, and I expect him to be extremely valuable in fantasy, and I think he's being undervalued. So those are my thoughts on the matter. Let me know what you think down in the comment section. Is Kerryon Johnson worth taking the risk for? Is there an inherent risk because of the backfield kind of organization there and how they kind of approach the running game with kind of a committee of sorts, yet still having their solidified RB1 on their team? So anyway, let's go ahead and move on. Let's talk about my next running back today. We're talking about another running back, like I mentioned, a part of the NFC North. We're talking about Aaron Jones. Now, I kind of mentioned a couple ideas on Aaron Jones the other day when I did my live mock draft, the best ball draft. If you haven't checked that out, go check it out. I took Aaron Jones as my third running back. I took 3 running backs back to back to back. But here's my thoughts on Aaron Jones and why I think he's another running back similar to Kerryon Johnson, which he's young, he's had injury history, and he's being undervalued in fantasy drafts. So let's talk about the Packers' running game first. All right, last season, 2018, the Packers were last in rushing attempts. Last. They only had 333 rushing attempts last season. Imagine that. Now, to kind of put it in perspective, they're bringing in an offensive coordinator, or he was the offensive coordinator of the Tennessee Titans, Matt LaFleur. They're bringing him in to be the head coach of the Packers offense. So if you're bringing in a guy that was completely just all in on running the ball with Henry, running the ball with Dion Lewis, what kind of an offensive scheme are we going to see here? Now, to kind of put it in perspective, Matt LaFleur in the past in his career has worked under Kyle Shanahan as the quarterback coach of the Atlanta Falcons back when they made their Super Bowl run. He also was the, I think he was like an offensive coordinator / QB coach for the Rams in 2017 under Sean McVay. So already he's got some experience under some pretty good offensive minds. Last season was given an opportunity to be the offensive coordinator, of the Tennessee Titans. Was pretty decent. Okay, for what they had weapon wise, with the quarterback issues they had with Mariota and Blaine Gabbert having to switch so often, they were pretty decent. They won a pretty good amount of games. They're probably most definitely on their defense winning them games, but still. He's coming into the Green Bay Packers offense, and I think he's going to bring in a mentality which we have to balance this up. We can't put the game on Aaron Rodgers' back for him to have to carry every single week. The guy's getting older. Yes, he's only 35, but he's dealt with some injury history in the past. If we can take the ball out of his hands and kind of let this offensive line and these young running backs kind of dictate games at times, it can be pretty, positive for 2019. And I think Aaron Jones is capable of doing that. So let's talk about Aaron Jones' past. Him and Williams. Aaron Jones and what is Williams' first name? Jamal Williams. Aaron Jones, Jamal Williams. Funny enough, they were both drafted in the same season. They were both drafted in 2017. Jamal Williams actually drafted before Aaron Jones, one round before, which was funny. But they were both brought into an offense in which Ty Montgomery was the lead back. He was a wide receiver turned running back. And to be honest, they needed a running back. Ty Montgomery, yes, could work in the passing game, could find some holes in the running game, but he wasn't going to be the answer for the Packers running game. Eventually, in his rookie season, Ty Montgomery got a little banged up, Jamal Williams got a little banged up, and Aaron Jones had an opportunity to produce. And he kind of made a couple people pretty excited on his potential. In his rookie season, from weeks 4 to 7, he produced the 6th most fantasy points amongst running backs. So in a little quick stint, he scored, it was a 4-week stint, scored 60 fantasy points. Had people excited, 15 points a week. That's pretty good, right? Then Ty Montgomery came back, Jamal Williams came, and then there goes Aaron Jones' rookie season. Gone, okay? Now, coming into 2018, he started the season with 2 suspended games, and then here comes Aaron Jones. So he came back, Jamal Williams was stinking it up, Ty Montgomery was stinking it up, but here comes Aaron Jones. What did he accomplish last season? 129 rushing attempts, 720 rushing yards, averaging out to 5.58 yards per carry, 8 rushing touchdowns, 6 of them coming from the red zone, which, from me, red zone rushing attempts, that makes a huge difference when it comes to fantasy running backs. 35 targets, 26 receptions for 206 yards, 1 receiving touchdown, averaging out to 14.32 fantasy points per game in his 11 games last season. So here's the thing. Similar to his rookie year in which he had that 4-game stint in which he popped off, he did the same thing in 2018. As soon as the Packers offense kind of shifted towards hey, you know what? This offensive coordinator and head coach, he's a garbage can. Let's get rid of him. Okay, great. Now that we've gotten rid of him, let's kind of settle this offense. Let's give Aaron Jones the opportunity. And that's what they did. From weeks 8 through 14, Aaron Jones had 532 rushing yards, 7 touchdowns, 22 receptions, 165 receiving yards, 1 touchdown, 18.1 fantasy points per game from weeks 8 to 14 last season. He was incredible. He was the number 5 running back amongst all running backs in that short amount of time. Pretty impressive in my opinion. So looking at what Aaron Jones is capable of doing this coming season, Jamal Williams has not been a great running back, but later on in the back half of the season, Jamal Williams had some pretty good performances himself. Where do I think between both of them, where are they going to lie? I think Jamal Williams is for sure going to be the RB2. I think Aaron Jones has way too much talent and has way too much opportunity in the passing game for them to leave him on the bench. Like Matt LaFleur said, I think a couple days back in a press conference, he said, I want to 100% target these running backs out of the backfield. Aaron Jones is the guy to do that. He's the guy that potentially could have 250 touches by the end of 2019 as long as he stays healthy, because that's the big deal. At the end of the 2018 season, had a season-ending injury that sent him to the IR, boom, gone. This coming season, if the guy can settle down, stay healthy, and just let the offense come to him because of how high scoring this offense could potentially be, because the Packers are going to improve offensively. They were awful last season in comparison to seasons prior. I think Aaron Jones can be a pretty good running back. As of right now, he's sitting at around RB16, which is kind of ridiculous because I think him and Kerryon Johnson should not be that low. But, hey, I'll take it. I will absolutely take it. I'll wait for a guy like this, hit him up as my RB2, perhaps my flex, and goes well for me, no problem. Another stat that I kind of looked into, in the 12 weeks that running backs from the Packers were given 12-plus attempts, okay, whether it was Jamal Williams or it was Aaron Jones, okay? Either one. If they were given 12-plus attempts on any given week, and there was 12 weeks that happened, they averaged 17.9 fantasy points per game, which is pretty ridiculous. So all you got to do is feed the ball to one of these guys, right? It's going to be Aaron Jones. I expect him to be good, and I expect him to have a little bit better of an offense. Again, they ran the ball the least amongst all NFL teams last season. Still ended up being pretty decent in fantasy for that good stint of time until, obviously, the injury. But no big deal. Anyway, let's move on. Let's talk about the last running back I wanted to mention. As we all know, this is another running back playing within the NFC North. We have ourselves Dalvin Cook. Now, Dalvin Cook is obviously the highest value guy. That's why I wanted to kind of mention him last because, as of right now, he's being ranked around RB12, 13. But I know many of you have hesitation on Dalvin Cook because I've mentioned him in videos prior, like my running back rankings. I think I had him at 12 2 months ago. And some of you voiced your concerns saying, Dalvin Cook might not be the guy. How could we rely on a guy that's honestly just injury prone? Now, I get that argument because in his first season when Dalvin Jones was drafted, Aaron Jones, Dalvin Cook, same difference. When Dalvin Cook was drafted to the Minnesota Vikings out of, what was it? Florida State? Yeah, he's Florida State, Seminole. Out of Florida State, came in the first 4 weeks of the 2017 season, his rookie year. He averaged 14.9 fantasy points per game. So he was starting off fire. Now, the reason they brought him in, Adrian Peterson had 2 season-ending injuries in the past 3 seasons. They needed a little bit of, they needed some life in the backfield. They brought in Dalvin Cook to address that, right? So in the first month of the 2017 season, averaging 15 points a game, dude was a monster. Then all of a sudden tears his ACL, gone his entire seasons. Forfeit Latavius Murray, Jerick McKinnon. They kind of figure it out, and they pretty much have a pretty good season there. In 2017, the Minnesota Vikings had the second most rushing attempts in the NFL with 501. So we know this team is capable of running the ball heavily, right? Obviously, they were with Case. Was it Case Keenum that? No, it was Sam. No, it was Case Keenum. Yeah, it was Case Keenum in 2017. So obviously, if it was Case Keenum, you got to run the ball a lot in order to keep the ball out of his hands specifically. But in 2017, the number 2 in rushing attempts, they were top 10 in everything else rushing-wise as a team. But in 2018, when they turned it around, with Kirk Cousins as the quarterback, this offensive line fell apart. They were in the bottom 5 amongst all stats. They were 27th in rushing attempts, 30th in rushing yards, and 27th in rushing touchdowns. They were awful. And yet, when Dalvin Cook was playing, he was really good. Last season in his 11 games played, 113 rushing yards for 615 total yards, 4.62 yards per carry, 2 rushing touchdowns, 49 targets, 40 receptions. Again, another good catch rate. 305 receiving yards for 2 receiving touchdowns, 12 fantasy points per game. Considering how bad the offensive line was for the Minnesota Vikings, how much Kirk Cousins was getting hit, how much the rushing game was just completely non-existent because of the fact that this offensive line was just a mess, Dalvin Cook, in the amount of time that he played, was pretty productive. In fact, from weeks 9 through 17, when Dalvin Cook was fully healthy, because he obviously had that little bit of a hamstring injury that kind of bugged him for the majority of the first half of the season. But for the second half of the season, weeks 9 through 17, Dalvin Cook was the number 12 ranked fantasy running back in that stint of time in half-point PPR scoring format. So we've seen Dalvin Cook, even with a shitty offensive line, let's be honest, be productive in an offense such as the Vikings. And the Vikings, they don't have a bad offense. Kirk Cousins threw 30 touchdowns. You got 2 wide receiver ones there. Obviously, they've adjusted. They've brought in guys for the offensive line to kind of bolster it up. They've got decent tight ends, and they've got a great defense. So this team's not bad. They've just got to be able to feed the ball to Dalvin Cook as long as he stays healthy, right? Now, let's talk about what Dalvin Cook has done throughout his career. In the 10 games throughout his entire career, that Dalvin Cook has played 60% of the offensive snaps. Okay, he's produced on average 15.2 rushing attempts per game, 5.2 targets, 4.1 receptions, 102.1 total yards, and 0.4 touchdowns. So on a 16-game basis, if he can play 60% of the snaps, which is 100% possible now that Latavius Murray is gone. Latavius Murray's gone. He's gone on to the New Orleans Saints. Boom, disappears. There's a boatload of opportunity for Dalvin Cook. So if we kind of mess around with these metrics a little bit, Dalvin Cook, on average, when he plays 60% of the offensive snaps, could see a season in which he's over. Well, I mean, technically, due to the numbers, it would be like 1,600 rushing yards. That's a stretch. 6 touchdowns, I think that's too little. 64 receptions, that seems, that seems about right. That seems about right. I think there's a lot of potential and capability to do that. And I think Dalvin Cook, as of right now, kind of being undervalued. Kind of taking into account what Cook and Latavius Murray both accomplished last season fantasy-wise as a combo. Both of them scored about combined 250.9 fantasy points. So if Dalvin Cook could have the entire opportunity of the backfield, the touches, the receptions he was always getting, but as long as he was healthy, if Dalvin Cook could stay healthy, stay in this backfield, absorb all the value of being the RB1 and bell cow of the Minnesota Vikings, I think he has a very good chance of being an RB1 this season. Comparatively to the 2 guys that I mentioned before, he is a safer opportunity to get the RB1 because of the fact that, Kerryon Johnson, again, is competing with other running backs in the backfield. Aaron Jones has another guy behind him. I know Dalvin Cook, they drafted a rookie running back to kind of be the backup for him, but I think comparatively, he's got the safest way to get there. But, again, all of these guys have dealt with injury history in their past, and I think that's what's kind of turning people off. The injury history, the fact that these backfields are kind of not solidified, it scares people. And I 100% understand that, but that's why I think targeting these guys as they go lower and lower throughout the drafts, as they become less and less valued, you'll be able to steal these guys at times. I know you're not going to be able to draft all 3 of these guys, in fact, because they're pretty closely valued in that RB2 kind of range. So targeting one of them, depending on which is your favorite, I think is a great idea. I personally like all 3 of these running backs. If I could have all 3 of them on my team, I'd be 100% satisfied with my draft. So as of right now, those are the 3 running backs I wanted to mention. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section. Thoughts, concerns, comments. Please like this video if you enjoyed it. And until next time, I will mention that tomorrow I will be doing a live stream I don't know what time. Let's say let's do 1 o'clock. I'm going to do like an hour live stream. I'll put it up so that like the notification kind of sits there. Come around. Let's talk. I'm going to be working on some fantasy stuff. You guys come by, ask questions, comments, concerns. Let's just hang out. So tomorrow I'll do a live stream about 1 o'clock, and we'll see what's up. So anyway, until next time, which is tomorrow, thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys later. Peace.